The cantina on Station Epsilon 7 was a dump, but it was their dump. The air hung thick with smoke from a dozen different alien species, each puffing on their preferred narcotics. Holographic advertisements flickered against the metal walls, advertising everything from synthetic limbs to memory wipes. The music was some awful Zilani death metal that made most species want to claw their hearing organs out. Vexilon didn't mind the noise anymore. After 20 years of nightmares, he welcomed any sound that could drown out the screaming in his head. The old Krathari veteran hunched over his drink, forearms wrapped around the glass like he was protecting it from thieves. His cybernetic eye cast a dim red glow across the table's surface, scanning the cantina out of habit. Old soldiers never stopped watching for threats, even in neutral space. His natural eye was milky white, damaged by shrapnel from a human explosive device. The scars on his carapace formed a roadmap of pain across his exoskeleton. Each mark told a story of battles fought in the dark void between stars, of friends lost to human ingenuity and determination. The cantina door hissed open, letting in a blast of recycled station air. 3 young cadets walked in, their uniforms so clean they practically glowed under the artificial lights. Fresh from the academy, Vexilon could smell their innocence from across the room. A Zilani female led the group, her antennae twitching as she scanned the room. Behind her walked a Morphean male, his skin shifting colors nervously. The third was a massive Tuskari, his tusks filed down to regulation length but still impressive. They moved through the cantina like tourists, gawking at the various alien species slumped over their drinks. Veterans from a dozen different wars sat in dark corners, nursing old wounds and older grudges. The trio spotted Vexilon and whispered among themselves. The Krathari sighed, knowing what was coming. Young soldiers always wanted war stories from the old-timers. They thought combat was glorious, that battles were won by superior firepower and tactical brilliance. They had no idea what war really was. Excuse me. The Zilani approached his table, her voice bright with curiosity. You're Vexilon, aren't you? The Kratari who fought in the human war. Vexilon took a long drink of his synthetic alcohol, feeling it burn down his throat. Depends who's asking. I'm Cadet Zara, she said, gesturing to her companions. This is Crix and Thane. We're on leave from the academy. Good for you. Vexilon didn't look up from his glass. Crix, the Morphean, stepped forward. His skin flickered from green to yellow, betraying his excitement. We've been studying the human war in our tactical classes. Everyone says it was overblown, that humans were just lucky primitives who got in a few good shots. The veteran's cybernetic eye flared brighter, casting red shadows across the table. Several nearby patrons glanced over, recognizing the warning signs. When Vexilon's eye glowed like that, smart people found somewhere else to be. Lucky primitives. Vexilon's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of decades. Is that what they're teaching you kids these days? Thane, the Tuskari, snorted through his nose. Come on, old-timer. Everyone knows humans barely had space travel when the war started. No shields, primitive weapons, tiny ships. How much trouble could they really be? The cantina seemed to grow quieter around them. Other veterans were watching now, their faces grim. They remembered the human war too, and none of them found it amusing. Vexilon set his glass down with a heavy thud that echoed through the suddenly silent space. His cybernetic eye focused on each young face in turn, recording their expressions. For posterity. Sit down, he growled. The cadets exchanged glances. Zara started to speak, but Vexilon's cybernetic eye flared again, brighter this time. I said sit down. They took seats around the scarred table, suddenly aware that every eye in the cantina was on them. The music had stopped playing. Even the holographic advertisements seemed dimmer. Vexilon leaned back in his chair, 4 arms folded across his chest. You want to know about the human war? Fine. Let me tell you about Kepler Station. Let me tell you about the day I learned that humans don't fight wars the same way the rest of us do. He paused, taking another drink. 200 humans were stationed there. Mining operation, nothing special. Just a little rock floating in space with some valuable minerals inside. Zara leaned forward. 200. That's nothing. That's what we thought too. Vexilon's mandibles clicked slowly. Command sent the 4th Assault Fleet. 10,000 of the Coalition's finest warriors, Krathari shock troops, Zelani infiltrators, Morphian specialists, Tuskhari heavy infantry, the best the galaxy had to offer. He gestured to his scars. I was a squad leader then. Young, eager, ready to prove myself against these new aliens everyone was talking about. It must have been over quickly, Crick said. Vexilon's cybernetic eye dimmed to almost nothing. 6 months. Those 200 humans held us off for 6 months. The silence stretched like a held breath. Around the cantina, other veterans nodded grimly, remembering their own encounters with human determination. But how? Thane whispered. You had superior numbers, better technology. Technology, Vexilon laughed bitterly. We had better technology when we arrived. But humans learn, they adapt. They take your advantages and turn them against you. He leaned forward, his scarred face inches from the young cadets. They turned mining lasers into weapons that could cut through our armor, used maintenance tunnels like blood vessels, appearing and disappearing before we could react. Every corridor became a death trap, every room a fortress. The veteran's voice grew distant, lost in memories. They didn't just fight us, they studied us, learned our tactics while we were using them. By the second month, they were predicting our moves better than our own commanders. Zara's antennae had stopped twitching. What happened in the end? We took the station. Vexilon's cybernetic eye focused on her. Cost us 3,000 warriors, but we took it. You know what we found in the reactor core? The cadets shook their heads. 43 humans, still alive, still fighting. They had rigged the entire station to explode rather than surrender. Vexilon's voice was barely audible now. They were ready to take themselves and half our fleet with them. He stood slowly, his prosthetic joints whirring softly. That's when I understood. We weren't fighting soldiers. We weren't fighting an army. We were fighting something that refused to accept defeat, no matter the cost. The cantina remained silent. As Vexilon walked toward the bar, leaving the 3 cadets sitting in stunned silence at the scarred table. Vexilon returned to the table with a fresh drink, this one stronger than the last. The 3 cadets hadn't moved, still processing what they'd heard about Kepler Station. Their clean uniforms seemed to mock the veterans' scarred appearance. After Kepler, our commanders held emergency meetings, Vexilon said, settling back into his chair. They studied the battle recordings for weeks, thought they finally understood human tactics. He took a long drink, savoring the burn. They were wrong, dead wrong. The cantina's atmosphere had shifted. Other patrons had moved closer, forming a loose circle around Vexilon's table. Veterans from different wars, different species, all united by the shared experience of combat. They knew what was coming next. Crix, the Morphian, leaned forward. What happened next? Frost Moon. Vexilon's claws scraped against the metal table, leaving fresh scratches alongside older ones. That's where I learned what humans really were. The veteran's cybernetic eye dimmed as he accessed old memory files. Data streams flickered across his artificial vision, replaying scenes from decades past. Command picked it specifically. Colony world in the Outer Rim, permanent winter season. Temperatures that would flash freeze most Coalition species in minutes. Zara's antennae twitched nervously. Another siege situation? Worse. The humans had been cut off from all supply lines for 8 months. No food shipments, no medical supplies, no reinforcements. Vexilon's natural eye focused on something beyond the cantina walls. Our intelligence said they'd probably starved to death by the time we arrived. A nearby Zelani veteran laughed bitterly. Intelligence was always wrong about humans. Vexilon nodded grimly. We dropped from orbit, expecting to find frozen corpses and empty buildings. Instead, we found something that still gives me nightmares. The cantina grew even quieter. Several alien species had natural reactions to extreme cold that made them shudder involuntarily when it was mentioned. The thought of surviving on an ice world was unimaginable to most of them. The human settlement was built into the planet's surface, but when we arrived it looked abandoned. Blast craters everywhere, buildings collapsed, no signs of life. Vexilon's voice took on a haunted quality. We thought we'd won without firing a shot. Thane, the Tuskhari, shifted in his seat. But they were still alive. Oh, they were alive. The veterans' mandibles clicked slowly. They'd gone underground, carved an entire city out of the ice using nothing but hand tools and mining equipment. Tunnels that went down hundreds of meters, chambers heated by geothermal vents they'd tapped into. Vexillon paused, remembering. When we entered those tunnels, we found humans wearing the fur of local predators they'd hunted and killed. Creatures that our xenobiologists said were impossible to track, let alone hunt. A Krathari veteran at a nearby table spoke up. I was there too. Saw a human child, couldn't have been more than 10 years old, skinning a ice bear with her bare hands. Thing was 3 times her size. The cold had changed them, Vexillon continued, made them harder, more desperate. Their skin was pale as ice, their eyes were different. They moved through those tunnels like ghosts. Crix's skin was shifting colors, rapidly betraying his anxiety. Surely they surrendered when they saw your forces, 10,000 coalition soldiers against a handful of colonists. Vexillon's cybernetic eye flared brighter. They attacked us the moment we entered their territory. No warnings, no negotiations, just pure, focused violence. The veteran stood up, his 4 arms gesturing as he painted the scene. They had weapons made from ice and bone, spears carved from the leg bones of those predators, arrows tipped with frozen metal, primitive by our standards, but effective in close quarters. He sat back down, his voice growing hollow. But the worst part wasn't their weapons. It was their tactics. They used their own frozen dead as shields and barricades, bodies of colonists who hadn't survived the winter, positioned to provide cover during firefights. Several of the younger aliens looked sick. Even among warrior species, using the dead as tools was considered barbaric. I watched a human female named Yijin take a plasma spear through her chest during the first engagement. The weapon went completely through her body, should have killed her instantly. Vexillon's voice became quieter. She grabbed the spear with both hands, pulled herself closer to my squadmate and drove a bone knife into his throat. The cantina was silent except for the hum of life support systems. She killed 2 more of my soldiers before blood loss finally stopped her. Fought for almost 10 minutes with a hole through her chest you could put your fist through. Zara's antennae had stopped moving entirely. How is that possible? Adrenaline, determination, call it what you want. Vexillon shrugged. Humans have this ability to keep functioning long after their bodies should have shut down. A Morphean veteran at another table called out, "Tell them about the medic." Vexillon nodded grimly. Dongsu, that was his name. Human field medic who set up an operating room in one of the ice caves. No proper equipment, no anesthetics, just heated metal tools and strong alcohol. The veteran's claws tapped against the table. I saw him perform surgery on wounded soldiers while the battle was still raging. Patients would bite down on leather straps to keep from screaming, and they'd stay conscious through the entire procedure. Why stay conscious? Thane asked. So, they could provide tactical updates while being operated on. Tell their medic about enemy positions, troop movements, weak points in our formations. Vexillon's cybernetic eye focused on the Tuskhari. They turned medical treatment into intelligence gathering. The veteran paused, accessing more memory files. On the 3rd day of fighting, we had them cornered in the deepest part of their tunnel system. One of our energy weapons malfunctioned. Created a containment field that started disintegrating anything it touched. He gestured to his prosthetic leg. A human named Jin Wu got caught in the field. The energy was slowly eating away at his leg, molecule by molecule. Most species would have gone into shock from the pain. The cantina held its breath. Jin Wu took out a plasma cutter and amputated his own leg. Just cut it off, cauterized the wound with the same tool and kept fighting. Vexillon's voice was barely audible now. For 6 more hours, hopping on one leg using a makeshift crutch, killing my soldiers with the same tool he'd used to cut off his own limb. Several aliens around the cantina made sounds of distress. The idea of self-amputation during combat was beyond their understanding. That's when I realized we weren't fighting people, Vexillon said, finishing his drink. We weren't fighting soldiers or colonists or even warriors. We were fighting a force of nature that happened to look like mammals. He looked at each young cadet in turn. And that force of nature was just getting started. Word had spread through Station Epsilon 7. about the old Krathari telling war stories. The cantina filled with beings from across the galaxy, but they gave Vexilon's table a wide berth. Veterans, traders, even some station security officers found excuses to linger nearby, nursing drinks and pretending not to listen. The three young cadets remained glued to their seats, their earlier confidence completely shattered. What had started as casual curiosity about an old war had become something much darker. Vexilon ordered his strongest drink yet, something that glowed blue and smoked when it hit the air. His cybernetic eye cycled through different display modes as he accessed deeper memory banks, files he usually kept locked away. After Frost Moon, High Command panicked, he said, his voice carrying across the now silent cantina. They'd lost 2 major engagements to what they still called primitive mammals. The Coalition Council demanded immediate action. A Tuskari merchant at the bar turned around fully, no longer pretending to mind his own business. They sent the 4th Fleet, didn't they? Vexilon nodded grimly. 20,000 ships, the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. Enough firepower to turn a planet into space dust in minutes. Zara's antennae drooped. That must have finished them. The veteran's mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter, but the sound held no humor. Oh, the humans were waiting for us. They'd been preparing for months. His cybernetic eye projected a holographic display above the table. The image showed twisted metal shapes that barely resembled spacecraft, covered in welding scars and improvised armor plating. See, months earlier, a human boarding party had captured one of our destroyers, the CSS Dominator, pride of the Zelani Engineering Corps. Vexilon gestured to the projection. Within weeks, they'd completely reverse-engineered our shield technology, our weapon systems, even our faster-than-light drives. Crix's skin shifted to a pale yellow. That's impossible. It takes our best engineers years to develop new technology. Human. Engineers don't think like us, a scarred Morphean veteran called out from across the cantina. They don't follow rules or protocols. They just make things work. Vexilon updated the holographic display, showing a massive mining vessel bristling with improvised weapons. They took civilian ships and turned them into weapons of war. That mining hauler there? It was designed to strip asteroids for rare metals. The humans loaded it with nuclear warheads and rammed it into our flagship. The projection shifted, showing cargo ships with missile pods welded to their hulls. Freight haulers became missile platforms. Passenger liners turned into troop transports. They even weaponized their garbage scows. Thane leaned forward, studying the images. These ships look like they're held together with tape and prayers. That's what we thought too, Vexilon said, right up until they started destroying our fleet. The veteran's cybernetic eye dimmed as he accessed more painful memories. But their ships were just the beginning. A human engineer named Taehyun had spent months studying our sun-harvesting technology. You know what he did with it? The cantina waited in tense silence. He turned their entire star into a weapon. Focused solar radiation through a network of orbital mirrors, creating a beam that could slice through our largest dreadnoughts like they were made of paper. Several aliens made sounds of disbelief. Weaponizing a star was the stuff of theoretical physics, not battlefield engineering. I was on the bridge of the Annihilator when that beam cut through our formation, Vexilon continued. Watched 12. Capital ships get vaporized in seconds. The humans had turned their home system into a giant laser cannon. The holographic display updated again, showing sleek vessels with unusual hull modifications. But something was wrong with these ships. They looked diseased somehow. The worst part wasn't their improvised weapons or their star laser, Vexilon's voice grew quieter. It was the plague ships. A Zelani trader near the back of the cantina shuddered. Her species had particularly sensitive immune systems. Humans had captured some of our soldiers during earlier battles, studied our biology, learned about our immune systems, our genetic structure. The veteran's natural eye focused on each face, around him. They created biological weapons specifically designed to kill us. Crix's skin was cycling through colors rapidly now. Biological warfare is banned by every galactic treaty. Humans weren't part of the galactic community yet, Vexilon reminded him. They weren't bound by our rules or our ethics. The holographic display zoomed in on one of the diseased-looking ships. Its hull was covered in strange growths, and the metal seemed to be corroding even as they watched. These ships were loaded with infected prisoners who had volunteered for suicide missions. Volunteers, you understand, they lined up to die for their species. The cantina was so quiet that the hum of the station's life support systems sounded like thunder. A woman named So Young personally piloted one of these plague ships to 7 different coalition worlds. She'd infect planetary defense networks, contaminate space stations, spread disease through entire fleet formations. Vexilon's cybernetic eye flickered. She died in the process, of course. The biological agents were as deadly to humans as they were to us. Then why use them? Zara whispered. Because humans understand sacrifice in ways we never will, the veteran replied. So Young killed herself to save her species. And it worked. Vexilon gestured to his prosthetic limbs, the metal catching the cantina's dim lighting. I got these, fighting a human named Kyung-ho during the Battle of the Ember Nebula. He was a demolitions expert who'd volunteered for something called proximity ordnance duty. The veteran paused, his voice becoming almost inaudible. He hugged me while detonating an antimatter charge surgically implanted in his chest cavity. Several aliens around the cantina made sounds of horror. The idea of turning oneself into a weapon was beyond their comprehension. The explosion took out half my squad. I survived because his body absorbed most of the blast, but Vexilon flexed his artificial fingers. I've been part machine ever since. A young Morphean server accidentally dropped a tray of drinks. The crash echoed through the silent cantina like gunfire, making everyone jump. That's how humans fought, Vexilon continued, as if nothing had happened. Not with superior technology or better tactics. They fought with innovation born from desperation. Every setback made them more creative, more dangerous. He updated the holographic display one final time, showing the aftermath of a space battle. Debris fields stretched for thousands of kilometers, the twisted remains of both human and coalition, vessels drifting in the void. We lost more ships to human ingenuity than we did to human firepower, the veteran said. They turned garbage into weapons, disease into warfare, their own bodies into ammunition. The display faded, leaving the cantina in dim lighting once again. And that was just the beginning, Vexilon said, draining his glowing drink in one gulp. Because humans had one more trick up their sleeves, something that would make all their previous innovations look like children's toys. He looked around the packed cantina, meeting the eyes of veterans who'd been there, who'd seen what came next. They were about to show us what real warfare looked like. The cantina had transformed into something resembling a lecture hall, with beings pressed against walls and hanging from support beams to hear Vexilon's words. Even the station's automated systems seemed to hum quieter, as if the machinery itself was listening. Vexilon sat motionless for long moments, his cybernetic eye cycling through different spectrums of light. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of unspeakable memories. After the plague ships, we thought we understood human warfare. Biological weapons, improvised technology, suicide tactics. But we were still thinking like civilized beings. His mandibles clicked slowly. Humans weren't civilized. They were something else entirely. A Morphean communications officer near the bar called out, "Tell them about the gift ships, Vexilon." The veteran's cybernetic eye flared, accessing files, marked with biohazard warnings. Physical warfare was just the beginning. Humans studied us like laboratory specimens. Not just our weapons or tactics, but our minds, our psychology, our deepest fears. The holographic projector above the table flickered to life, showing sleek vessels painted in bright, cheerful colors. They looked like civilian transports, passenger, liners, even children's toys scaled up to spacecraft size. They sent us gift ships, Vexilon continued, beautiful vessels broadcasting messages of peace and friendship. The first one we encountered was called the Harmony Express, painted like a rainbow, transmitting children's songs and lullabies. Zara's antennae twitched nervously. That sounds nice. The songs were in human languages we'd never heard before. Melodies that seemed peaceful, even beautiful. Vexilon's voice grew distant. But hidden within those lullabies were mathematical patterns designed to exploit flaws in non-human neural structures. The projection showed brain scans from different alien species, neural pathways lighting up in chaotic patterns as the music played. The melodies triggered specific responses in our hearing centers. Zelani would experience time distortion. Morphians couldn't control their shape-shifting. Tuskari would enter permanent rage states that burned out their nervous systems. A Zelani engineer in the crowd spoke up, her voice shaking. I was aboard the CSS Enlightenment when we received one of those transmissions. The music was so beautiful we let it play for hours. Vexilon nodded grimly. Tell them what happened. Half the crew went catatonic within the first day. The other half started destroying equipment, trying to escape the sound. She touched a scar on her temple. I had to burn out my own hearing. Implants to stop the psychological effects. The veteran's cybernetic eye flickered erratically as he accessed more traumatic memories. I was on the bridge of the Annihilator when we encountered the gift ship called Sweet Dreams. My communications officer played the transmission through the ship's speakers before we realized what it was. The cantina held its breath. Within minutes, my weapons officer was clawing at his hearing organs, trying to dig out the sound. My navigator collapsed, mumbling about mathematical equations that didn't exist. The ship's doctor started performing surgery on himself, claiming he could hear geometric patterns under his skin. Vexilon touched the scar along his neck, a jagged line that disappeared into his armor. I used my combat knife to sever my own auditory nerve connections, cut myself open right there on the bridge to escape the psychological attack. Several younger aliens looked sick. The idea of self-mutilation to escape sound was beyond their understanding. Crix's skin was cycling through colors so rapidly it was making other patrons dizzy. How could music be a weapon? Because humans understand that the mind is the most vulnerable part of any warrior. A scarred Krathari veteran called out from the back. Physical wounds heal. Mental wounds last forever. Vexilon updated the holographic display, showing coalition prison ships and interrogation facilities, but the gift ships were just the beginning. When humans started capturing our intelligence, officers, we expected them to use physical torture like civilized species do. The projection showed a simple room with 2 chairs and a table, nothing that looked like torture equipment. Instead, they used stories. A human named Minho would sit across from prisoners and tell them tales about their homeworlds being destroyed. He'd describe the process in perfect detail, down to the sounds civilians would make as their cities burned. The display showed brain scans of interrogated prisoners, their neural patterns chaotic with trauma. He'd tell a Zelani prisoner about their crystal cities melting under human acid rain. Describe to a Morphian how their shape-shifting colonies would be poisoned, their people dying while stuck in grotesque forms. Vexilon's voice became barely audible. He wasn't threatening them. He was just telling stories. Thane leaned forward. But they were just stories, right? The details were too specific, too accurate. Minho would describe the exact architectural layouts of cities he'd never seen, the names of leaders he'd never met, the specific cultural practices that would cause maximum psychological damage to each species. Their Tuskari intelligence officer in the crowd spoke up. The humans had done their research. They knew us better than we knew ourselves. Hardened warriors who'd survived decades of combat would break down completely after a few hours with Minho. Vexilon continued, not from physical pain but from the pure horror of imagining their people's extinction, described in loving detail. The projection changed, showing the final phase of the war. Coalition fleets surrounding a yellow star, countless ships arranged in attack formations that stretched across the solar system. The final gambit came when we reached Earth itself. We had them cornered. Their fleets were destroyed, their colonies captured, their military infrastructure in ruins, Zara whispered. Finally. We thought we'd won, Vexilon said. Our combined fleets outnumbered their remaining forces 1,000 to 1. Earth was defenseless, ready for conquest. The projection zoomed in on a single human vessel approaching the coalition command ship. It was tiny compared to the massive alien dreadnoughts surrounding it. Their leader, a woman named Su Jin, requested permission to speak with our high command. She came aboard our flagship alone, unarmed, wearing a simple diplomatic uniform. The veteran's cybernetic eye dimmed as he accessed the most classified files in his memory banks. She smiled at us, actually smiled, like she was greeting old friends at a social gathering. Then she calmly informed us that they had rigged their sun-to-go supernova. The cantina erupted in sounds of disbelief. Weaponizing a star was theoretical at best, suicidal at worst. She explained the process like she was discussing the weather. Vexillon continued. Gravitational manipulation devices, placed at specific points around their star, quantum field generators that could destabilize stellar fusion. They'd spent months preparing their own solar system as a weapon. The projection showed sensor readings from coalition science vessels detecting massive gravitational anomalies around Earth's sun. Our scientists confirmed it within hours. The humans had actually found a way to trigger stellar collapse. If we didn't withdraw immediately, they would detonate their own star and take our entire invasion fleet with them. He looked at each young face in turn. She wasn't making demands or threats. She was stating facts. If we attacked Earth, they would commit species suicide and destroy us in the process. Crix's skin had gone completely pale. But that's insane. They'd kill everyone on their planet. 8 billion humans, Vexillon confirmed. Men, women, children, elderly, sick, healthy. Everyone. Sujin told us they'd held a planetary vote. 97% chose extinction over surrender. The projection showed Earth from orbit, a beautiful blue and green world that looked utterly peaceful. She gave us 30 minutes to decide. 30 minutes to choose between conquest and mutual annihilation. The veteran's voice was barely a whisper now. Then she sat there and waited, still smiling like she was looking forward to either outcome. The cantina was silent except for the sound of alien hearts beating too fast. That's when I finally understood what we were fighting, Vexillon said. Not soldiers or warriors or even fanatics. We were fighting a species that viewed their own extinction as an acceptable tactical option. He gestured to the packed cantina around them. Every being in this room understands survival instinct. We fight to live, to protect our people, to preserve our species. But humans, he paused, searching for words. Humans were willing to embrace death as victory. Station Epsilon 7's cantina had never seen anything like this. Beings from across the galaxy packed every available space, some hanging from ventilation ducts just to hear the old Krathari's words. The air recycling system struggled to keep up with the crowd, creating a thick atmosphere that seemed to pulse with tension. Vexillon sat perfectly still, his cybernetic eye cycling through memory files he'd tried to forget for 20 years. The weight of those final days pressed down on him like the gravity of a dying star. Command held emergency sessions for 3 straight days, he said finally. Admirals, generals, political leaders from every coalition species. They'd never faced anything like Sujin's ultimatum. The holographic projector showed the coalition high command chambers, filled with alien officials in heated debate. Their biosignatures revealed stress levels that should have been fatal. The Zalani wanted to call the humans bluff, said no species would actually destroy their own star. Vexillon's mandibles clicked bitterly. The Morphians disagreed. They'd studied human psychology reports and believed the threat was real. A Tuscari admiral in the crowd spoke up. I was in those meetings. We spent 72 hours arguing while Sujin waited patiently on her ship, counting down the minutes until detonation. What decided it? Crix asked, his skin a nervous shade of purple. Our science teams confirmed the gravitational anomalies were increasing every hour. The humans weren't just threatening to blow up their star. They were actively destabilizing it during the negotiations. Vexillon's voice carried disbelief even decades later. They were literally holding a countdown timer to their own extinction. The projection shifted to show coalition fleets retreating from Earth's solar system, thousands of ships pulling back in chaotic formations. Command made the call to withdraw, not because we couldn't win, but because victory would have cost us everything. The veteran gestured to his scarred body. We had won every major battle, controlled every human colony, destroyed their military infrastructure. But we couldn't occupy a species willing to die rather than submit. The cantina's silence was broken, only by the hum of life support systems working overtime to handle the massive crowd. The peace negotiations were held on neutral station Gamma 9 3 months later. I was there as a military advisor, part of the coalition delegation. Vexilon's cybernetic eye projected images of a sterile conference room. I'll never forget walking into that chamber and seeing the human negotiators for the first time. Zara leaned forward. What were they like? Calm, professional, terrifyingly reasonable. The veteran's natural eye focused on something beyond the cantina walls. Their lead negotiator was a man named Jun Ho. Half his face was melted from plasma burns, missing his left arm from a shipboard explosion. But he wore a perfectly pressed diplomatic uniform and spoke in measured tones about reconstruction plans. The projection showed a scarred human male, sitting across from a table full of alien officials, his remaining hand gesturing as he spoke. He had detailed proposals for post-war trade agreements, cultural exchange programs, even joint military exercises, talked about establishing human embassies on coalition worlds, sharing technology, coordinating defense against external threats. Vexilon paused, accessing more memory files. As if the war had been a business transaction that was now concluded, Thane shifted uncomfortably. But they lost. Their worlds were in ruins, their people scattered. Had they lost? Vexilon asked, his cybernetic eye flaring brighter. Yes, we controlled their territory. Yes, their cities were bombed, their fleets destroyed. But at what cost to us? The projection updated to show casualty reports from across coalition space. The numbers were staggering, 60% casualty rates across all coalition forces. Our economy was in complete collapse from the war effort. Entire species suffering from what your modern doctors call post-traumatic stress. The veteran gestured around the packed cantina. Look around this room. How many veterans do you see? How many are missing pieces of themselves? For the first time, the three young cadets truly looked at their surroundings. Cybernetic implants glinted in the dim lighting. Prosthetic limbs moved with mechanical precision. Scars told stories of battles fought in the dark between stars. Every being in this cantina carries wounds from that war, Vexilon continued. Physical, mental, spiritual. We won every battle and lost our souls in the process. A Zilani communications officer near the bar spoke up, her voice hollow. I still can't listen to music without hearing those human lullabies, 20 years later, and certain frequencies make me catatonic. My species stopped having children. For a decade after the war, a Morphean trader added, we were too afraid of what we might become. Vexilon nodded grimly. The humans understood something we didn't. Victory isn't about winning battles or controlling territory. It's about making your enemy question whether the fight is worth continuing. The projection showed Jun Ho presenting reconstruction plans, his burned face animated as he discussed the future. Despite his injuries, despite his people's losses, he seemed genuinely optimistic about peace. He talked for hours about rebuilding, about learning from the conflict, about preventing future wars. Never once mentioned revenge or reparations. The veteran's voice grew quieter, just focused on moving forward, as if the deaths of billions were acceptable prices for teaching the galaxy a lesson. Movement at the bar caught Vexilon's attention. A quiet human male sat alone, nursing a drink and listening to the story. He was unremarkable, except for old burn scars on his hands, and a slight favor to his left side that suggested a missing limb beneath his clothes. Their eyes met across the crowded cantina. The human raised his glass slightly in acknowledgement, a gesture so subtle that most beings missed it entirely. Then he finished his drink and stood, moving toward the exit with the careful precision of someone compensating for old injuries. Jun Ho, Vexilon whispered, recognizing the negotiator after all these years. The three cadets spun around, but the human had already disappeared into Station Epsilon 7's endless corridors, just another face in the crowd of thousands. He comes. Here sometimes, Vexilon said softly. Never speaks to me, never acknowledges what we shared, just listens to the stories and leaves. The veteran stood slowly on his prosthetic legs, servos whirring as they compensated for his weight. He placed payment on the table, enough to cover drinks for the three young cadets. That's my advice to you younglings, he said. looking at each scarred face in turn. "If you ever encounter humans in battle, remember this. They don't fight to win, they fight because they refuse to lose. There's a difference." He moved toward the cantina's exit, his mechanical limbs carrying him past tables full of veterans from a dozen species, each bearing scars from humanity's introduction to galactic politics. "And that difference," his voice carried back to them, over the crowd, "is what makes them the most dangerous species in the galaxy." The cantina slowly returned to its normal sounds of conversation, gambling, and the occasional fight. But the weight of Vexilon's words lingered in the recycled air. Like smoke from extinguished hopes, Zara, Crix, and Thane sat in stunned silence for long minutes, processing what they'd heard. When they finally spoke, it was in whispers, as if normal conversation might disturb the ghosts of the human war that seemed to haunt every shadow. "Do you think he was right?" Zara asked finally. "About humans being the most dangerous species?" Crix's skin had settled into a pale blue, the color of deep thought among his people. "I think we've been asking the wrong questions. It's not about whether they're dangerous. It's about what makes someone willing to embrace extinction rather than surrender." Thane, the massive Tuscari, spoke last. "My grandfather fought in the border wars against the Helican Empire. He always said the scariest enemy wasn't the one with better weapons or more soldiers. It was the one who had nothing left to lose." Years later, each of the three would become decorated officers in their own right. Zara would command a deep space exploration vessel seeking new worlds beyond the galactic rim. Crix would join diplomatic services, specializing in first contact protocols with newly discovered species. Thane would rise through military ranks to become a coalition general. But none would ever forget the lesson learned that night in a crowded cantina on Station Epsilon 7, that sometimes the greatest victories come at prices too terrible to calculate, that the line between hero and monster often depends entirely on which side of the battle you're standing on, and that somewhere in the galaxy, humans were still out there, still refusing to lose, still teaching the universe new definitions of determination and sacrifice. The end.